Hey, welcome back to A Word with Tom Merritt. That's me, Tom Merritt, helping you figure out how to think in the world. Remember, there's lots of people worth listening to that'll tell you what to think, but there's no chance for all of us to listen to all of them. So we have to take shortcuts. We have to filter information. We have to decide what to bring into our brains. And these are the kinds of conversations I love to have. As you've heard on previous episodes, if you've been listening, I would sit in the front room with my grandpa Carl and talk about the news of the day. I would sit in my grandma Roxy's front room and talk about the stories of her life, which taught me about how life works. And so I got lots of different ways of looking at the world. And those kinds of conversations really help me figure out how to think without necessarily telling me what to think. And it was all training me for this show where I welcome into the front room Ron Richards.
Hello, Tom. Thanks for welcoming me. What a wonderful setup. Like, I just want to get a cozy spot in the front room and be in your presence and your grandparents' spirits' presence, because it sounded awesome.
You can, my grandma's in the rocker. My grandpa's
excellent.
in the big green comfy, chair.
I feel like I hear like distant AM radio playing Moonlight Sonata, maybe like
or a Cardinals game on Camel.
Yeah, or Cardinals game,
like
or just something scratchy, right? Yep, there's a pitcher of lemonade, maybe. This is just this is America. I love it.
Well, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, and the word we're going to use to kick off these conversations, and if people haven't caught on to this yet, the word is not the topic we have to stick to through the whole thing. It's a way to get going. But Ron, you work on a show called iFanBoy, right?
I do from time to time. I helped co-found iFanboy back in 2005. No, well, sorry. We co-founded iFanboy, the website, in 2001. And then we started the podcast in 2005 because I was a fan of yours on Buzz Out Loud, and I was bored and wanted to start a podcast, but I didn't have anything to talk about. So I said, I've got this website where we talk about comic books. Let's just do that as a podcast. And then it changed my life forever.
And still going today.
Still going to this podcast thing for 17 years now. Yeah. That's crazy.
That's amazing.
It's crazy.
But
just to clarify, I am no longer a regular co-host of the regular comic book show. I do still come in once a month, and we do a show called Media Explode where we talk about movies and TV and what we're watching. But because I am now employed by a comic book company, it would be unethical. So I stepped back from the weekly comic book reviewing duties. So
and that day job also has you interacting with fans and fandom.
Yes, quite a bit. I do. I don't talk about it a lot publicly, just because you get a lot of spam on LinkedIn when you do. But my day job is at Marvel, where I help run the digital media department. So I get to work on the Marvel website, Marvel social media, and YouTube and podcasts and all that fun stuff. So really an extension of what I did with iFanboy, just really focused on the one brand. Luckily, I think the brand is doing okay these days. So like, there's a lot to talk about, but it definitely keeps me busy. And it definitely not only exposes me to a lot of fans of the brand and of the characters and the stories, but also helps us like create stuff for those fans to consume. So I'm very lucky and blessed to be in that position.
So I want to use the word fan to kick off our conversation here. And if this were a what to think here, let's educate you kind of podcast, we'd probably, go into the history of the word and
the etymology.
Yeah. Right? And, it's a fanatic, and it was, I didn't look it up, but I seem to recall it sort of arose around sports, around baseball, particularly.
Interesting.
Yeah, I may be wrong about that, but how do you think of the word fan now? How do you use it?
Well, it's funny because I didn't even think about the fanatic etymology aspect of it. I forgot about that. When we first talked about doing the show about the word fan, I immediately thought of, wow, that's one of my favorite words, because I grew up in a house, probably not dissimilar from your front room with your grandparents, but on Long Island in New York, without air conditioning. And in my teen years, I devised a very complicated system of fans in my bedroom to cool me down. And it was actually one of my favorite things growing up, which was kind of like the day where it was hot enough that I had to break out the fans and set up the whole fan system. And I have a direction here, Tom. I know where I'm going with this. I just love those fans. They cooled me down, and they made it livable in this house, this awful ranch house in Long Island without air conditioning. And it was something that I appreciated so much and had such a love for that, like, at the end of the summer, in the fall, I hated taking them down out of my windows because I just appreciated them so much. And the connection is that when I think of fan, I actually don't think of fanatic, because I think of what is that? Wasn't that Patton Oswalt movie about the crazy fan? Yeah. But because I think fanatic takes it to a level of negativity, which is, kind of the dark corner of the word fan. But for me, fan, much like the mechanical fans of my youth, is something that you appreciate, something that you love, something that is a part of your life that enriches your life. And then therefore you become a fan of it. And so much of my career and so much of my life for the past, honestly, going back to high school, when I was involved in the punk and hardcore underground music scene, has been built around community, and built around community that is based on content, which is, I know it's such a horrible media inside baseball buzzword. I'm tired of the word content, but like, you find your tribe, you find like-minded individuals who appreciate that same bit of media that you love. And therefore you are all fans, and you share in that fandom. And when it's a good thing, it's like the best thing in the world. It's a celebration of the things you love. So that's why I really like this word, because not only do I think of cooling down in the summer, but the things I love. So. Yeah,
I'm really glad you brought it back around, because I was worried we were going to have to talk about, the different styles of box fans for the
well,
next
listen,
hour.
Can I tell you though, this box fan was like from the 70s. It was like canary yellow metal. And then,
I know the type. I know exactly
with the type. With the plastic grill. Yep. And over the years, if you would squeeze the two pieces of the plastic grill, one would snap off. So there are all these like bigger holes. Yep. I don't know, whatever. And it had a 2-plug, like it didn't have a ground plug on it, like that kind of.
There's a sound. There's a tone to that box fan for sure.
And that tone does not exist anymore in modern society. Dyson has obliterated that whir of a fan. But honestly, it's like I've got 2 sleeping toddlers in the other part of the house. I have a little noise machine that we turn on, white noise, when they go to sleep, and it's the same noise as that fan noise. So I love that fan. And can we just talk about the fan?
I was going to say that the side jag about the appreciation is so good. It's really, really good, because fandom, being a fan of something, isn't about the content. It's often about content these days, because we love to tell stories and share stories. And it's one of the ways we can all experience the same thing, right? Because we can all watch or read or listen to the same music or show. But it's being a fan is a shared appreciation of whatever it is. It could be box fans. And in fact, that's one of the things the internet has made possible, is you can be a fan of box fans and go find a bunch of other fans. And I would not be shocked if there's a box fan like meetup where people get together and share their love and pictures and restoring projects of all of that. Like that, the fan runs so deep in that way.
Right. And that's the thing, is that because when we think of fans, you think of crowds of people, swaths of people. You think of, you think of that fanatic aspect of it. You think of like this like extreme approach to it, like Steve Sansweet. Do you know Steve Sansweet? It's from Star Wars. He used to work at Star Wars. He was the guy. I'm pretty sure he ran the Star Wars Insider magazine for years, like the fan club magazine. And then he worked for Lucas, and I believe he's independent now, but he's got I forget the name of his ranch, but he has a much like George, a ranch, and it's just filled. He claims to have one of everything that's ever been produced of that Star Wars.
Right. Okay. Yes. I'm familiar. Yeah.
And so he you see the picture of him in the archives with all the stuff around him, and you think that's a fan, right? but you think of somebody like me who grew up with Star Wars, and it's so easy to talk about Star Wars for fandom, but like I grew up with Star Wars. Yes, I had the action figures. There's some, I'm drinking out of a Star Wars pint glass from Alamo Draft House, but like I don't have a warehouse full of every piece of merch that ever came out, right? So there's a spectrum to that fandom, and I do feel that the extreme side of fandom is what often gets covered by the media, what often gets discussed. But like if you sat here and told me, Ron, what are you a fan of? We could probably spend the rest of this conversation with me listing the things I'm fans of, like numerous things that we have shared fandom of. Twin Peaks, for example, right? Our old podcast together, right? Whether for me it's comic books or Star Wars or sci-fi or music or all these kind of things. Baseball, sports. There's so many things, chefs, restaurants. There's so many things to be fans of. I just see it as kind of I go back to that word of a celebration of the things that we love. So.
It's really important to talk about. Important. It's not important. There's so many important things in the world. Like, let's talk about ending poverty. But it's, if you want to understand fan, I think you have to understand that it can mean so many different things. Yeah. Like you said, it can come from the word fanatic. It's short for the word fanatic, but that's not what it means anymore. Just as the word terrific comes from terrifying. Something was terrific if it terrified people, and now we use it to mean something's awesome, right? It followed that same journey. But it's interesting that when you brought up the media coverage of fan, we assume everybody thinks a fan is a positive person who supports their team or movie or whatever. And then the media is like, but the fans have gone bad and did this or that.
But there is a dark side to fandom too. There's a dark side to the fan, which is like, and going back, Star Wars always seems like the great example, but like Star Wars has had a real toxic fan culture for the most recent years. Filled with gatekeepers and racism and like awfulness, and like kind of breaks my heart as someone who loves Star Wars to see kind of like what has become. And I will give the folks at Star Wars credit, and technically coworkers of mine, because we all work for the Walt Disney Company, but like they've really kind of faced the toxicity head first on social, and like call people out and tell them they're wrong and talk about what Star Wars stands for. It stands for inclusivity and all this sort of stuff, and it's really kind of turning the tide, which is fascinating. But like that's a great example of like you can become such an intense fan of it that you feel the need to protect it, and you feel the need to defend it, and you feel the need to exclude people because there's no way they can understand it the way you do.
Right.
Right. And that's the life lesson for me, which is like how to not take it too far.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there is a lot of similarity to fandom and tribalism. The first episode of this series was Andrew Heaton talking about tribalism. And in that case, we were talking about it more in the sense of politics, but I think there's a root human behavior to identify with a group. And just like all of our evolutionary behaviors get modified by modern circumstances, we can identify with more than one group, right? I can be a fan of the BC Lions and a fan of BTS and a fan of Star Wars, and they don't contradict. But I think there's the person who becomes so involved in the fandom starts to want to circle the wagons and like a tribe say, you know what, our tribe can't be everybody or it doesn't have meaning. We have to set boundaries on it. And I'm going to set the boundaries here for what it means to me. That doesn't always have to be a bad thing necessarily of like, oh, well, you're a fan if you listen to the music of the thing and that's it, right? Okay, that's fair. You're a fan if you know every lyric of every song. Well, that starts to feel like gatekeeping. Like there's gradients there.
It's and it's this sense of ownership that comes from a long-term period of fandom.
Yeah.
Right. And I even go back to my music days. So like I mentioned, I got into punk in freshman year of high school, and all my friends were in bands in high school and I couldn't play anything. So I just went to all the shows, and then eventually I roadied, and then I started doing a zine just because I wanted to be a part of the community and do something because I was such a fan of it. But what I often laughed about and had so much, some great conversations similar to the conversations you have here on the show with friends about was that, what is more inclusive than punk rock, right? Like the whole point of punk rock was to separate from the norm and to be different and to be
break
free
down the
thinkers and
walls
yeah, exactly, and welcome everybody. And then what you saw that this scene emerge inside of the local scene of local kind of geographies. And so you had like the people who were really dedicated and huge fans of the music, and they started feeling ownership of that community. And then what you had was the exact opposite happen, where, God forbid, in 1994 at a Long Island hardcore show, if a dude walked in wearing a football jersey, he would be shunned because, that jock is here, right? Like, but wait a minute, aren't we the culture that lets everybody in? Like, it was, so it's really interesting from a sociological standpoint or a cultural standpoint to see how these groups wrestle with, embracing those who have any level of fandom in what they do, not the let me check your bona fides at the door. I make fun. Actually, Josh Flanagan, who's one of the co-hosts and co-founders of iFanboy, I joke with him because he's going through a minor midlife crisis in his 40s and getting into music. Like he, listening to a lot of bands I listened to back as a kid. And one band he got into was Bad Brains, which is great, legendary punk band, stuff like that. And I have a rule, by the way, how I define my fandom is that I only wear band T-shirts of bands I've seen live. Right. Sure. Because I feel like it, like I bought it at the show.
There's a connection there.
There's a connection there.
I was supporting that band. I was there. I watched them. I experienced the music directly. Yeah, I get that. I get that.
And a lot of people don't do that. Like, obviously Hot Topic is made on that. You could buy a T-shirt of any band and that sort of thing, which is fine. I don't question it. Anybody can do it. So he had bought a Bad Brains shirt after having never seen Bad Brains live. And we're hanging out. I just said, name 3 songs. Right now, just tell me the name of 3 songs, and he couldn't. And so, but that was even me. I mean, I was busting his chops. Yeah, that was even me gatekeeping to a certain degree.
For sure,
you're not a real fan. You don't even know the names of songs, And so, it definitely is the dark side of fandom, which is that sense of ownership and that sense of that, like you need to check people's ID at the door, which I personally have tried to rally against as much as I can in my life, but I've been guilty of it too. It's like you feel an investment to it, and it's a weird thing that happens. And on one hand, I've always wanted to be an evangelist of the things I love and welcome as many people. And if it's good, you should share it. But I've been this, I got pissed when that band signed to a major label and when Green Day blew up and like all this sort of stuff, right? Like it's a weird human reaction that I don't think we can control. And I don't know if it's tied back to our sense of belonging or going back to that tribalism or a sense of community or trying to find a definition for how we define our own identity in the eyes of those around us.
Yeah, because I feel like there's a common arc with all fandoms that I have ever been associated with or have observed, even if it is from the outside, which is when it's small, you can be immediately part of it just by knowing about it, just by being interested in it, right? Because when it's small, people are like, oh, I'm so excited to find someone else who's interested in the same thing. Let me help you learn more about it, right? Come on in. I'll teach you Dungeons and Dragons in 1978 because no one else knows it, right? Then it starts to grow, and there's just a natural human tendency to start to get tired of seeing people discover something that you've known for a long time. And you start to feel a little sense of superiority of like, yeah, I remember being excited at the first rule book, but that's a long time ago. 2, people doing different things with it than you did, right? And once it becomes big, when it reaches scale and there's so many people doing it, now it not only doesn't feel special anymore, because there's so many people doing it that you feel you push back and like, no, what was cool was that if you knew, you knew. And it was fun to meet someone else. It's not fun to meet someone else who knows the thing or is interested in the thing when everybody's interested in it. And then I think that creates some of that backlash and that gatekeeping of like, well, you can either say, well, I'm not into it anymore. It's they sold out, right? It's they sold out situation of like, it's too popular now, or it's the gatekeeping. I'm going to try to keep the fandom smaller again. I'm going to try to build a new wall.
Well, what's interesting and what kind of first came to mind, I keep saying what's interesting, I apologize.
But
It is interesting. But what immediately came to mind is a lot of my experience with iFanboy. Like, a fan is in the title, right? It was which, by the way, in the history of website and podcast names, if I could change one thing in my life, I would come up with a different name. Although I will say I am proud of the logo. If you can go to iFanboy.com, you can see the logo. It is just iFanboy written in the Fantastic Four font.
Yeah.
And I will
genius.
I will take the compliment in that a comic book creator by the name of Darwin Cook, who unfortunately is no longer with us, but was a good friend of mine. We were at a dinner at San Diego Comic-Con one night, and I was lamenting the name iFanboy and saying if we can go back in time, we change it. And I said, or at least come up with another logo. And he immediately told me he very curse word laden yelled at, and he came from advertising. Before he worked in comics, he worked in advertising in Toronto, and he said that logo is perfect. I see that. I know exactly what it is. I know exactly where you guys are coming from. It speaks to people who are into comic books in a way that nothing else does. The combination of the name plus that font and that look, he's like, it's classic, and it communicates what you guys are about, which is being fans, right? Yeah, which is one of
and great to hear from somebody who knew.
Yeah, who respected, who also then told me I have a face that looks like it's being asked to be punched. So you got to take things that Darwin said with a grain of salt.
That tells me everything about him that
exactly,
I need to know, because I've met that kind of guy. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But anyway, what I found with iFanboy was that there's almost a cycle of fandom that I've seen, at least in the comic book geeky kind of world, right? There's a cycle of fandom where you discover a thing, you immerse yourself in it, you try to learn as much as you can with it, you seek out community, you find like-minded people, and then you begin to turn on them when they don't agree with you, right? And this is also oftentimes divisive in a lot of the move from comic books to movies and the adaptations and things like that. But so much of, at least of the fandom at scale that you mentioned that I've dealt with has been folks who have found validation through that connection in fandom. That, okay, great, I'm alone and I found people who are like me, awesome. But then when we disagree, how could you disagree? I thought you were on my side. And then it's a weird mind cycle.
That's a good point, because that doesn't even, the scale doesn't even matter there.
Right. Well, sometimes the scale does, because it depends on the number of people who are coming in.
There's more chances
and
to
new
disagree.
Voices. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it's like that division within fandom. And you see it going back to Star Wars again, but you see that. I'm guilty of it. I'm an original trilogy guy. I'm sure you are too. We're of an age where Star Wars ended at Return of the Jedi.
It literally is one of the first movies. That and Grizzly Adams are two of the earliest movies. Herbie the Love Bug. It's when I started to be able to have memories that I could still form. Star Wars was right there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But then there's a whole nother generation that grew up on the prequels, and that's Star Wars to them. And I argue with them often. And there's a whole generation that grew up on the cartoons, which I've never even watched. And they're like, I'm watching stuff on Disney Plus, and I'm like, who is this person? And one of my staff is like, oh, that's so-and-so from Clone Wars. And I'm like, yeah, that doesn't matter. That doesn't count, So it's this weird dichotomy between being based in loving something and having the ability to have it go negative so quickly for a myriad of reasons that I find fascinating.
Because we tie identity into it, right?
Yes,
it's
exactly.
who you are, right? It's the emblem. It's why you wear the shirt, right? You have a rule about wearing the shirt of the band you saw, because it means something for you to wear that shirt and signal to the world, I am a Bad Brains fan. That's why I'm wearing this. Yeah.
I mean, I'm guilty of it too. I've co-opted a line from Goodfellas, another one of my favorite movies, and something I did a podcast about with Goodfellas Minute. But there's a line in Goodfellas where they're talking at the end of the movie where they're talking about the mob life, and it's like you'd meet somebody and say, oh, he's a good fella, he's one of us.
Yeah.
And I use that all the time. Like, Tom, if I'm introducing someone to you in the tech podcasting space, I would tell you he's one of us.
Yeah,
she's one of us, and that's an indicator of like, okay, they're part of the tribe, they're part of the fandom, they're part of the whole kind of thing.
It's a shortcut. to where like I don't have to vet this person now because Ron told me everything I need to know with that one phrase. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And conversely, on the other side, as someone who identifies with different subcultures and different communities through fandom, it has completely defined my identity now, like to the point where like, especially when in terms of music, where, you be out at a bar with a bunch of people and someone's talking about the latest George Strait album or whatever. And I'll leave because I'm like, that's not my people. Like it's not.
George Strait's
like,
pretty good. You should give him a shot.
I can't. I have no idea. I almost said George Thorogood. Is that's a musician too, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah, George Thorogood, a whole different, but also good in its own way. Yeah.
It's really the Georges of music. I could run down the whole list.
Yeah. No, I can see that. What about George Harrison though?
I mean, George Harrison's pretty good. He's likely you watch Get Back, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just the to see the budding genius of him, and then to understand what he went on to do in the 70s, and just like
that was an interesting situation. Speaking of fandom, because I watched Get Back with Eileen, my wife, and we're both fans of music and the Beatles, and so it was fascinating to see that process captured.
Amazing,
and the editing that was done to make it feel seamless, like you really were there, just wonderful. And it was one of those situations where you're a fan of something and you're like, even though it's the Beatles aren't as big now as they used to be. The world has aged. They haven't been around. There's only 2 alive. So I wasn't sure who I could just really wax eloquently about that with. Yeah. And I was so excited to find out that Brian Brushwood, our mutual friend, had not only watched it, but was just as excited as me. And that's the spark of fandom when you're like, oh, you watched the thing too. You know that. Oh my gosh. Can you believe that one part where he did this and that? And you're bonding over that.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because my wife and I, we've known each other. We went to high school together. So we've known each other forever. And she is probably one of the only relationships in my life that is not built on common likes. Again, lifting it from another source material, but the book and the movie High Fidelity, makes the point of, in the context of dating that, it's not about who you like. It's about what they like. Mm-hmm. Right. And the idea like you have common interest in music, you have a common interest in whatever, like that's what's important. But my relationship with my wife proves that actually like she's into yoga and she's a vegetarian. I love steak, and while we have some commonality, like some music crossover, and obviously we like one another because we got married and things like that.
Yeah.
She is not as rabid over media and movies and TV and stuff as I am. And there's stuff that she is into that I'm not into, but we both kind of came together around the Beatles because we both love that. And we both watched Get Back together. And it was the kind of thing where like, we just couldn't wait to dive back into it, and spent hours analyzing it and talking about it. And just like the realization, like the moment of the thing about the Beatles as a fan, because we grew up with them, they were always older.
Yeah.
Right. It was this thing from the 60s and it was before I was born and all this sort of stuff.
They were perfectly encapsulated, right? Because they had a beginning, middle, and end as the Beatles. Their solo careers were still going, but the Beatles themselves. Yeah.
But what blew my mind is what we saw in Get Back, which is at the end of the Beatles career, but like they're like 28, 29. And there was one scene where they wrapped up recording and they're hanging out and Paul just starts climbing the lighting scaffolding, like an anxious kid.
Yeah.
And I was like, now as a mid 40s dude, I was like, oh God, they were just kids.
Yeah.
They didn't no wonder.
And we, at least me in high school, they were adults, right? Because they were in their 20s. Exactly. They were grownups. And then, to watch them being 50 and go like, oh yeah, no, they to see them kind of casting around and like, we know because we have 60 more years of music history since then, we know like, oh, you just need to do this and then you'll fix your band's problem. But they had never existed. There had never been another Beatles yet.
But what's interesting about, to bring it back to what's interesting about being a fan of these things is that there is a like Jurassic Park, like, a mosquito stuck in amber. There is a moment in time that encapsulates that fandom and really does a number on your own internal age clock.
Yeah.
Right. Like where I'm 45. I do not, in my head, I'm like 26, like it is, I am stunted in this time period of when I was going to see music live and when I was going to Comic-Con for the first time and when I would like all these things were happening for the first time and life seemed so vital. Not that life doesn't feel vital now,
Sure.
but there's a connection to the past through fandom that helps me feel younger, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I see that a lot when I go to conventions, and you see people from all walks of life, but especially when you see somebody who's 70 or something, and they're at the Doctor Who convention, and they're up on all the new Doctor Who stuff as well, but they can tell you everything about the early stuff because that was at that point, right? And that's what bound them to it. It made me think of a really interesting phenomenon, and I'm curious if you have also experienced this, where especially in that period, that vital period, right? Maybe between the ages 12 and 18, where you start to discover stuff, right? You discover the Beatles, you discover different music. And at least for me, there's always a dividing line in my head of three categories, and I'll keep it to music for this particular case, but there's, let's use Bruce Springsteen as an example.
Sure.
I discovered Bruce Springsteen with Born in the USA, the cassette.
And as did millions of people, because that was his breakthrough mega hit.
So I was 14 years old. That comes out. I buy the cassette. I'm like, wow, this guy's really good, right? Because I'm young. I haven't really been exposed to Bruce Springsteen yet. So I start going into the catalog, and I've got a friend who's an older friend. He's like 2 years older, but in my mind, he was like so much older. Who's like, you've got to check out Asbury Park. Asbury Park's amazing. Like a lot of people think Nebraska or this or that, but and so I started learning about Bruce Springsteen, and I listened to all the songs, and I'm like, man, all these things are amazing. This one's great. That one's great. That one's great. So I have in my head two categories. There was like the incredible things that Bruce Springsteen did that were never wrong. They were all incredible, all his works up until Born in the USA. And then there's Born in the USA, which is also incredible because I discovered it myself without any help. And it's really good and everybody loves it and everybody agrees, but it feels more modern to me. I feel like there's a dividing line. There was all the stuff he used to do, which is his old sound, and now there's Born in the USA. And then every album that comes after that, I feel like isn't as valuable because I already know it. It's not that it isn't good. The songs are good, but I'm like, oh, but I already know about him. So I devalue how good the thing I love is from then on. And you could apply this to any band. Duran Duran was another one I did this with, where I kind of got in with Hungry Like the Wolf. And those first two albums, I feel like those are the good ones. But the ones after that, I already knew about them.
I will say though, "Ordinary World" is holding up to be a legendary song. I listened to First Wave on Sirius XM.
Well, and that's the thing. It's like the songs are great, but there's just something in my mind's like, that's in the category of I already knew about them.
Well, and what you're describing is something is a theory that I've applied. Which, by the way, talking about bona fides, I worked in a record store for many years, so like I can talk snobbishly about music. But I'm actually a firm believer that not a firm believer, but I have a belief that most bands have 2, maybe 3 good records in them. And there's also a correlation aligned to when you discover them and how you enjoy them and your tolerance for them. Right. So like Jimmy Eat World is a great example of a band, right? So Jimmy Eat World, one of my favorite bands. I discovered them I discovered them in a VFW hall outside of Detroit, Michigan at the Detroit Hardcore Fest in 1997. They were playing on Sunday afternoon. They drove up from Arizona. Their first record had come out on Capitol. They blew everyone away. Like it's a VFW hall, bunch of kids, right, in March, right? It's cold outside. Everyone's all jammed into this room. And they're awesome. Bought the record, loved it. Their second record, Clarity, came out. That even better, and like you're just feeling kind of immersed in it. And then Bleed American comes out and it blows up and they become super huge. And I stuck with them though. I love that record. Bleed American's awesome. I went to go see them on that tour at the Roseland in New York City, which is a much bigger venue than a VFW hall in Detroit. Right. And then I remember then the next album came out. I listened to it. I'm like, it's fine. And then the next record came out and I'm like, it's fine. And then the next record came out and I just didn't buy it. And then there's like years of records that I just have not even listened to, even though I describe myself as a Jimmy Eat World fan.
Mm-hmm.
the line stops at some point, and it might be tied to what your thought is, which is like there's something, about the discovery and the they say you never forget your first time, or you never, like, there's nothing like the first time, right? And once you kind of immerse yourself in it for a little while, there's only so much juice to squeeze out of that lemon, so to speak.
Yeah.
So
it's a bias in me though, because I think of U2, for example.
Well, U2, as far as I'm concerned, Octung Baby's their last record. Like, I discount everything after that.
And maybe that's true, but my personal experience was I started working at the radio station in college. Joshua Tree had not come out yet. So U2 was, War,
right. And they were edgy. They were underground.
And they were amazing. And I was like, this is really interesting. And then Joshua Tree comes out and I'm like, oh, this is also very good. And everything after that, I was like, not as good. Yeah. Even though Octung Baby is very good. And I will hear songs from Octung Baby and like, this is one of the really good U2 songs. And then remember, but no, it's from the later album. Right, like there's just a bias against that. REM is another one. Losing My Religion, that album is the album where like, but I already knew about them by then. So that album can't possibly be as good.
I will say, "What's the Frequency, Kenneth?" is also another song that holds up. Yeah. That's a great song. But what I'm interested in, what you got me thinking about, is the reverse of this, which is the discovery moment and the entry into fandom and the immersion, right? And how do you like when you said let's go back to middle school, teen years, or whatever, when you become a fan. And this is somewhat of a difference between now and then. And here we are, two old men talking about how life was better when we were kids in the 80s and 90s. But in this case, like, there was finding something new and discovering something felt like a secret that you had that you weren't, but there was like a forbiddenness to it, and you weren't, and the adventure that you go on, almost like playing King's Quest on your PC, the adventure that you go on to find more information about it and discover it. Like, so for me, one of the big categories of music I'm a huge fan of is Britpop. I love Britpop. And the entry point for me was a band called Suede, which literally was 2 moments in time back to back. Was that I was watching 120 minutes on MTV, because what I would do is I would tape 120. For those who don't remember or know, 120 minutes was a 2-hour show. Obviously 120 minutes.
Yeah. It was literal.
That was on Sunday night at midnight on MTV. And I was in 8th grade, 9th grade. I couldn't stay up that late. So I used to tape it, and then I would watch it through the week. And that's how I discovered bands and stuff like that. And I saw a music video for Suede's song called Metal Mickey. And then they showed their first album cover, and it's like this drawing of 2 androgynous people kissing. And I didn't know what Britpop was. I didn't know nothing about it. I was just like, I like that. I went to the record store, bought the record sight unseen, and consider myself a lifelong fan of them, despite their bad records. And the discovery of this new thing, and then the journey I went on to like buy magazines, to read an interview, and then like, oh wait, okay, the singer used to go out with the girl from the singer from Elastica, and she's dating the guy from Blur, and then you start building this like family tree mental map of all the connections, and like you read the liner notes to see who they thanked, and like things like that. Like that journey, I don't know if people do anymore, because all the information is so available and ready.
They do it. They just do it in a day now, right?
Yeah,
you just go start doing a search, and then and
Wikipedia.
Yeah, it made me think when you were explaining that. It's like one of the reasons that fandom is so much more intense now is you don't have that slow build up. Yes. Where you're going out and discovering things. You're able to just immediately immerse yourself in the fandom within seconds. Yeah. And so if you want to keep that feeling going, there has to be more, right?
Right.
There has to be, it's like a drug. There has to be a more intense sensation to keep you, you build up a tolerance to that really fast.
Yeah, and I don't want to be I don't want to be similar to one of the negative people we talked about earlier, but I really do think that there was more value, or at least for me, it was more fun in that slow build and that adventure. I totally look at it like an adventure of like finding more information out, finding more like-minded people. But that said, now, like a few clicks of the keyboard and you find that community, you find that Facebook group, and then immediately you're immersed in that community that I do advocate for and do love. So I got to imagine there's pros and cons to it, but man, and the thing is, even now in this day and age, there's stuff that I discover and you want to learn about. Like, it's just that discovery and that entry point into fandom is kind of what I I don't say it's addicting, but is super attractive in terms of why like what motivates you in absorbing things.
That dopamine hit.
Yeah, exactly.
I would imagine that before recorded music became common, since we're using music as our example here, that there were people who were fans who, when recorded music came around, was like, it's just not as valuable now. You can just go buy the wax cylinder and listen.
Right,
you don't have to wait for them to come to your town. It was so much more meaningful when I sought out the sheet music and had to play it myself on the piano. I feel like there's always that. There's always like the new way of things makes it too easy. But those of us who grow up in the new way of things don't think of it as easy. We just think of it as the new way of doing things.
It's just the status quo.
And there's some adaptation to it that's like, well, sure, I can find out all the connections and the actual song's easy now, but I don't know all the intricacies. And bands are better now about creating whole storylines, that go with them. And you have more complex stories that folks are telling. And this goes with TV shows and movies where the movies leave lots of Easter eggs in and connections and secret connections to other parts of the fandom for you to find, because it isn't as much of a journey to just discover the movie. Like you've got to give people a little more to go on there.
Right. And it's interesting though, because you have me thinking now about like the things that the ways I define myself as a fan, right? I've talked about music, obviously comic books, movies, things like that. But one thing that you and I share is a fandom of baseball, right? Of sports. Yeah. I never chose my fandom. I was 7 years old and I said to my dad, I want to go to a baseball game. I didn't say I want to go to a Mets game.
Yeah.
I said, let's go to a baseball game.
And sadly, he took you to the Mets. Huh.
We went to Queens and I had no choice from there on out. Now I still have gone on that journey of like, once you discover what baseball is and what Mets are, the baseball encyclopedia and past years and stats and all this sort of stuff, it still happens. But like, that's a fandom that I never chose, which I still will. I will lay down and die for, but like, and I can't tell you why. Like,
no, that is really interesting. And I think different types of fandoms are different in that way. I think movies and sports are more like that than music. Music seems to be more of part of your rebellion. Right? Yeah. Like you choose your music to differentiate yourself. Whereas sports, I tried to rebel because I grew up going to Cardinals games. We went to Busch Stadium, but my grandpa that I mentioned in the intro was a St. Louis Browns fan.
Ooh,
and he denied that he was a Cardinals fan till the day he died. He was like, I'm a Browns fan. I don't have a team anymore. They left, right? Because the Browns moved to Baltimore and became the Orioles in the 50s. But while he protested against the Cardinals because he had grown up as them being the crosstown rivals, he followed every game. He listened to every game on the radio, watched every game that was on TV because not all of them were on TV back then. He read about the Cardinals in the paper. We talked about the Cardinals all the time, but he refused to admit that he had become a Cardinals fan. And so I tried to rebel. I tried to be an Orioles fan to support the heritage. There's a picture of me wearing a Cubs hat, which is the ultimate rebellion. Lord. Yeah. It's one of those embarrassing gotcha pictures that they'll show against me when I try to run for Cardinals someday. But in the end, I came back to the Cardinals because I never really left. It was the team that I enjoyed watching growing up. It was the team that I had all those great conversations about baseball with my grandpa about. And so it was baked in. Like you were saying, that you were taken to a Mets game and you were stuck being a Mets fan. I even tried to wriggle out of it and I was like, nah, there's just something emotional when you're that age that those logos and those colors and that team gets burned into you.
Which I can't even fathom, because like a friend of mine who also grew up in New York, albeit a Yankees fan, moved to the DC area and is now just like, I see pictures of her and her family at Nationals games and they're all in Nationals gear. And I'm like, how can you just because you moved, become a fan of the team in that city? Like, I lived in San Francisco for 10 years. I loved going to Giants games. I always wore my Mets hat. It's again tied to that identity. And it's funny because going back to fandom of my day job, I was actually chatting with one of my coworkers at Marvel because he asked me, what team is Captain America a fan of? Is Steve Rogers a fan of? And I said, well, he was born in Brooklyn, so I'm going to say he's probably a Mets fan because of kind of the location. And he disagreed. He thought he was probably a Yankees fan. I was like, well, no, actually, let's think about it though. He was probably a Dodgers fan.
He's a Dodgers fan. That's what I was.
He's a Dodgers fan. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And
because
so
of the era, right?
Yeah. So the question is whether or not he stuck with the Dodgers after they moved to Brooklyn, or if he then just became a fan of everybody because he's Captain America and he's the best. Well, so that's probably where we netted out on. But yeah,
sure. But I would see the Dodgers being, because he goes to sleep and the Dodgers are in Brooklyn. Yeah. Right. He wakes up and everything else has changed in the world. So of course the Dodgers moved, but yep. He was gone for a long time anyway. So
yeah,
everything has changed. They don't even have the senators in Washington anymore. My goodness.
Right. I go back to Shoeless Joe, the book by W.P. Kinsella that Field of Dreams is based on, where and then in the movie they adapted it but the writer, it was J.D. Salinger in the book, but it's like, and then and the Dodgers moved to LA and they tore down Ebbets Field, like the whole, like the disconnection from fandom and tying to reclusiveness because this thing that you love now was taken away from you, which is funny because going back to our shared fandom, like Twin Peaks, like that's another one that I had a rabid fandom of and it went away because it was over. And then it came back, right? Like this idea of this fandom boomerang or this, kind of fandom being taken away from you, but then being thrust back into it with a reboot or, whatever, like in our old bizarre culture now of monetizing everything and getting stuff out and doing things, it's like, I do think that there's like the lifespan of a fandom ending, but then having it be resuscitated is another aspect of it, because you have to reconnect again.
That is really interesting because at a certain point, the source material gets exhausted if there's no new source material coming in. And some people could continue to find novelty and adoration in that and be intense fans all the way to the end. But like you say, I think I was the same way. I'll boomerang back myself every once in a while. Before Twin Peaks came back to Showtime, every once in a while I would just go back and rewatch. Every once in a while I'd pop on the soundtrack. Like it would just come back and like, you know what? I really want to re-experience. I want to tie myself back to that time in college when I was going over to friends' houses and we were making speculation about it. And so when it came back, I had mixed feelings because I absolutely wanted more Twin Peaks. I'm like, the idea of new Twin Peaks to find out, where they are 25 years later. Loved that. But also I was worried because not that I'm not one of those people who's like, you ruined my childhood by making the prequels. Kind of, I don't believe it's like I still can love everything I love, even if there's a new thing that's made that's bad. But I also was like, but will I like the new thing? It's less about it would never ruin the original for me, but will you make something where I'm like, I wanted more, but it wasn't this.
Right.
And David Lynch was certainly the right choice for that because he was going to try to give you something entirely different and not just like feed you more of the same, but also a risky choice because he's going to give you something different. Right.
Right. Which is funny because as I've evolved in my fandom, I don't want to revel in the past. I do want to be challenged.
Yeah.
And going back to tying that back to Star Wars, they're pumping out a lot more content, trying different things. I would rather have something new like The Mandalorian than something rehashed like the sequel trilogy, like Force Awakens and that sort of thing. Like I want the challenge and I'm willing to accept it going not with what I expected and possibly not liking it versus just getting refed the thing that got me into it years ago.
Yeah. I am a lore nerd. So when I get into fandoms, I really like the lore that surrounds them. And I'm an actual fan of history as well and figuring out like what actually happened. And so I approach some of storytelling like history, like tell me more. So The Force Awakens I loved because it started to shine light on what had happened. And I think there is a case for that is something that not everybody wants, and that's fine. Not everything is for everybody, but there's a case for you can do that really well, but it's really hard because you have to be a fan of the thing you're making, and I think that showed with The Force Awakens that, there was a fan sensibility, but there's a difference between fan sensibility and fan service. Fan service, I would say, is when someone applies that to something where you thought I would like this as a fan, but you didn't understand my fandom. That's
Exactly.
when people throw around fan service rather than fan sensibility, which was, oh, you obviously understand this the way I do. And so you extended it in a cool way.
The great example of this, which I talked about a lot on iFanboy in the past pandemic years or whatever, I know we talked about at some point, was that there's a moment in the movie Solo when Han is running away and goes to the Imperial Navy kiosk and ends up signing up to join the Empire, and they play the Imperial March like in the scene, like on a commercial, which was clearly fan service. You're like, oh, it's the Imperial March, like it's whatever. And of course, me and my friends hated that because it wasn't you know, we know all that music is not diegetic or is diegetic, whatever, like like that sort of thing, right? But then then I think about Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, one of my all-time favorite movies. That the opening sequence with young River Phoenix is young Indy, where he takes the whip to protect himself from the lion and whips his chin, and that's how he gets his scar. Yeah. We love that. Right. So like, why did that bit of fan service connect and something that I love and treasure? And then the fan service in recent Star Wars movies, I turn the cheek at and say, oh, they're trying too hard. And I think your point is that like, it's fan service that doesn't understand the fandom. And it's someone who thinks that they're giving me what I want because it's just something I recognize, which it's more than that.
And when you're dealing with lore that already exists, it constrains you as a storyteller, right? And I think that's where a lot of very good storytellers go wrong, where they're like, yeah, but I want to tell this kind of story, so let me just make it work within the framework. And it's a different skill to say, let me actually connect the dots and make a good story, rather than take a good story and try to fit it into the framework of what existed before. And that's, I don't disrespect somebody who tried to do that and failed, because that's difficult.
Yeah. I mean, that's going back to Star Wars. That's why The Mandalorian worked and some other things didn't, like as much. I was so excited for the Book of Boba Fett and so let down by that entire series, just because it was just trying too hard. And it was a weird kind of thing. And then the best episode of Boba Fett was the one that was about the Mandalorian, right? Like, so like there's a little, and the thing is, there's a little bit of alchemy. There's a little bit of magic that happens in media, whether it's a book or a movie or a band or music. And that's kind of what I love, which is that you can't put your finger on it and you possibly can't replicate it, but it's when everything kind of connects and works. And that's what draws you in. And that's what makes it, impossible to ignore. Like even going back to on the music example, another band that I love that I abandoned because of popularity, like Green Day, was able to reignite that magic with American Idiot and bring me back in as a fan, And so, you can't break it down too much or try to break it into its parts, because it's not, it's art, and so,
yeah. And we all, I say this all the time on Sword and Laser as well. We all bring our own experiences into every piece of art we consume.
Yep.
The consumption of art, whether it's books, movies, TV shows, a painting, whatever, is semiotic. It's an interaction between you, the art itself, and the intention of the artist. And so that's always different for every person. And that's why I try not to say this was bad. I try to say, I didn't enjoy that, because I've also had situations where I've enjoyed something later in life that I didn't enjoy, or vice versa, really enjoyed something young and then later didn't enjoy it, because I'm bringing different experiences at different points of your life.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that you can't have it happen again. Like that, it goes back to, and that's kind of like your first time in love and all this sort of stuff, is that like, you can chase the dragon of that. Yeah. But you're not, it's not going to work. Right. So.
Yeah. I want to, before we get to our game, because we could talk forever, and we're going to have to put a line under it at some point. But I would throw out that I feel like Doctor Who is special in the fact that it has ridden all of those waves. Like it's a special case of having been started as a one thing that turned into another, and then leaned into it, and then kind of burned out, and then tried to come back, and then it failed, but then tried to come back, and it did. And that's why Russell T Davies, I think, is deserves a lot of credit for being able to take something that is way too old with way too much lore, should never have worked. And he not only lost his first Doctor after a season, but still was able to make something really compelling there. So I'm kind of excited that he's coming back.
But what's funny though is that like I totally understand and respect and agree with everything you said about Doctor Who. I'm not a fan.
Yeah.
And what I love about it is that Doctor Who and Harry Potter, something also I'm not a fan of, all trigger Stranger Things, something else that I wouldn't say I'm not a fan of. I just haven't watched. What I love in fandom is the reverse of this, what I like to call the air suck clutching pearls moment, where I tell someone that like, yeah, I'm not a fan of Harry Potter. And they go, oh, you're not, but they're so good. And like and it's so funny that there's the Harry Potter, Stranger Things, Doctor Who, Breaking Bad. These are all things that I have either not watched or have decided I'm not a fan of. That like you almost insult someone who's a fan of them by not doing it, which just cracks me up because it's like, whatever, like love what you love. It doesn't matter. I acknowledge the quality of Doctor Who and the fandom and everything they do. I understand it from an intellectual level. I've watched some of it and not for me. It's okay.
And it's all over the place. That the reason, the real special thing about Doctor Who to me is that it has been so many different things and yet still has maintained a consistent fandom somehow. Well, that, having you admit you don't like Breaking Bad, I think is a good way to leave this. Are you ready to play a game?
I love games. Let's do it.
All right. This is called This or That. Some of these I recycle from guest to guest because it's kind of fun to see how different people react, and some of them are brand new. So basically, what happens is I will give you a choice of this or that, and you tell me which one you chose and why.
Okay.
The sound of a dot matrix printer or the sound of a laser printer?
That's a good one. I would go with dot matrix.
The classic, the analog.
Yep.
The patter.
Yep.
And
for me, I'm sitting behind an Apple II Plus using Print Shop from Broderbund.
Oh yeah, no, that's a scene that you just said right there. That's amazing. This one's kind of a personality test. Fast or slow zombies?
Slow. Because I don't believe in fast zombies.
You don't believe they exist. You don't think they should.
No, I mean I understand. Like there was the World War Z or whatever it was with all the
28 Days Later has fast zombies too,
which was good. I will give 28 Days Later good. I just feel like zombies it's the slow foot dragging crawl.
So you're saying because of tradition, because that's Night of the Living Dead was slow zombies. That's what zombies are.
Yeah.
See, I love this question because we get both kinds of answers, and yet there's always a different reason. Yeah, because people have said, "Oh, slow zombies," because they won't catch me, as if it were real. You know that?
No, no. I know zombies don't exist, so I'm okay with that. But it's just more of at the heart of what zombies are. I applaud the innovativeness of making fast zombies, but I don't subscribe to it.
All right, Bob or Mike?
Am I a bad person if I say Bob?
No, that's the way more interesting answer, right? For anybody who doesn't know, these are characters in Twin Peaks, and Bob is pure evil and Mike is his antithesis.
Right. But the thing is that I just love everything about the story of Bob and Frank Silva and the shot of, the hiding behind the dresser shot. And like, I just everything about it. In fact, in the iFanBoy Slack, we have a Slack bot that anytime somebody writes Bob, it does that image of him crawling over the couch. Right? So.
Well, and it's that fandom thing where people tend to like the negative stuff, right? They want to play Horde in World of Warcraft. They want to be House Slytherin if they're Harry Potter fans, all that kind of stuff. I think you can answer this one, but tell me if it's a conflict of interest somehow. Irredeemable or incorruptible?
Irredeemable.
Mm-hmm.
I just liked it better.
Yeah. Is it the same thing where it's like, well, you got the good gone bad situation?
Yeah, kind of. We're talking about the comic book from Boom Studios, right? Okay, good. I just want to make sure. Yeah.
I mean, we could change it to be something else, but that's what I intended.
No. Yeah. I thought Irredeemable came at a time in the comic book world where it like Mark Waid is just a fantastic writer and fantastic creator, and that concept because Wade has such a great career and history of writing the classic superheroes, including Superman, and the whole thing with Irredeemable was just like the turning it on its side kind of thing, and did it in a way that no one else could have other than Wade. And at that moment in time of comics, we needed that story. So that's kind of, and then Incorruptible came along afterwards, and it was good, but Irredeemable felt like a moment. So.
They're kind of, it's kind of an unfair comparison in that respect. Although I tend to like Incorruptible better, I think, because Irredeemable, I was amazed by. I was like, the Superman goes bad kind of premise was incredible. But then Incorruptible, I was like, well, he can't do it again. He can't go the other way. And he did, and I liked it. So I feel like that maybe I just had more admiration that he was able to pull it off. I don't know.
Right.
Hammock or beanbag chair?
Hammock.
Yeah.
I find as I get older, it's very hard to get out of the beanbag chair, to get up from it.
Some people think it's harder to get out of the hammock, because I've heard people pick beanbag chair for the same reason.
Yeah. I don't know. I like a hammock. I like what a hammock does for you. Like, I like the free swinging kind of feeling of the hammock. Like,
can you read in a hammock?
Sure.
Yeah?
Well, it depends on the hammock. It depends on the hammock.
Well, sure. Yeah.
And now immediately I'm doing the Simpsons, the hammock district bit in my head. But because my sister has one of those hammocks that is like, when you're not in it, it's just like, it bunches up. It bunches up versus the hammock that is stretched out. I actually like
that's what I have.
That is
I have the hammock that's stretched out.
The stretched out hammock, I think, is a little more secure in that regard.
And it's easier to get in and out of, I think. Yeah. All right. Host of All About Android, Samsung or Pixel?
Pixel all the way.
Yeah.
I am not, I going back to when I did the show with Eileen, Jesus, now 11 years ago. I know, it's just awful. The fact that I've been associated with not one, but two podcasts for more than a decade is crazy.
Yeah.
But you share the same things. No, but for whatever reason, I've never been a Samsung person. Like, I again respect it. It's like Doctor Who for me. I see what they're doing. There's some innovation there. So they've done some things. They definitely changed the game in a lot of ways and shape and form, but I've never owned a Samsung phone.
Samsung is the Doctor Who of Android phones. Got it.
Yeah.
Tom Seaver or Dwight Gooden?
Funny that you bring this up. I got to go Dwight Gooden, because I like Dwight Gooden so much, but I'm not a Seaver fan.
No, really.
And the thing, again, I respect the man.
It is a little. I'm having that Harry Potter reaction there.
Yeah, exactly.
A Mets fan who doesn't like Tom Seaver that much.
Yeah. Well, because and it's all about that generational. I grew. That first Met game I went to was in 1985, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was
Doc
like
Gooden's
Doc Gooden's his rookie year and the phenom. And I remember getting his baseball card and all that sort of stuff. My problem with Tom Seaver isn't about his playing days. It's about in the late 90s when he was in the broadcast booth for the Mets, he was awful. He just made everything about himself, which I just
ruin
and completely soured me on his whole career. And I just and I'm glad they put a statue up of him, blah blah blah. But like, he would throw out the first pitch at Met games, and he'd be in a suit, and he would pick up some dirt and rub it on his knee, and then throw the pitch, because his pitching motion back in the day, it was so elongated that he would scrape his knee on the mound and his knee would always be dirty. But the fact that he would pick up dirt and put it on his knee on his suit,
stage it.
It's just kind of like, okay, dude, to stop patting yourself on the back, please. Like, his ego just got me. So
I feel like I dodged a bullet then, because I loved Tom Seaver growing up, because I was doing this reading club when I was in grade school, and I read the biography of Tom Seaver, and it's one of those picture book biographies that, makes people sound amazing, whether they are or not. And I was just like, oh, I love this. And his name was Tom, and I was Tom, and all this stuff. And so I always had a soft spot for Tom Seaver. Of course, I never liked Dwight Gooden, because the Cardinals and the Mets were like, neck and neck during that period. So, I never had to listen to Tom Seaver in the broadcast booth. So
it was rough. It was rough. Also, he had a marble mouth.
Three more here. Savory or dessert crepes?
Dessert crepes. I have a sweet tooth.
Yeah. Do you just want the sweet?
I just want the sweet.
Dogs or cats?
Neither.
I like this answer.
I hate to do this or that, but like I'm not a pets person. I don't like pets at all.
Pets.
So,
yeah.
Well, this is bad. I mean, I'll back it up. If I had to choose one of them, I would choose dog because my family's been a dog family. We had 2 dogs when I was growing up. My sister has dogs. So I would definitely, if I had to choose between the 2, dogs.
Yeah.
I do not like cats. I think cats are like the foot soldiers of Satan's army. Like they always get scratched. They always hurt you. But pets just break my heart, man. They die.
Yeah.
Right.
They do.
Like it just, like my father didn't cry at his father's funeral. He cried when we put our first dog down. Like, that breaks his heart. I can't.
But the cure is more pets.
Yeah, I know. So
yeah. And then hot or cold?
Cold.
You're a cold person. All right.
I'm a cold person. Yeah.
Not that you're a cold person, but
no, right. No, emotionally, I'm dead inside.
You're
no,
quite the opposite.
I'm taking that. Well, which is funny though, because I'm taking it as temperature. Like right now, I have the AC pumping, and like it's been like 90 degrees in New York, and which is nothing in LA, I know, but
no, it's been cooler here than New York this past week, which is crazy.
I'm keeping the house at like 72 degrees, which is like my wife walks around in a sweater.
Uh-huh.
But what's funny is that, when you're talking about food, I've been getting more into spicy food and hot food versus cold food, like that sort of thing. So, it depends on the meaning of hot or cold, So.
Yeah. Well, Ron, my friend, as I knew it would be, it was a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you for sharing so much about fandom, for taking so much time to chat with us. Really appreciate it, man.
Of course, wouldn't miss it Tom's got a new podcast. I'm lucky to have been invited. I really appreciate it, and I could do this for hours on end. So
yeah, seriously,
I appreciate you gabbing with me. So, if
you want to direct people to places, where should they go to find out more about what you got going on?
I'll run down. I got a lot.
Okay.
So as mentioned, you know about Marvel, but go to marvel.com or follow Marvel on social. Yeah. You can see my work.
I don't know if you've heard of that. It's a publishing company. They do some movies. Folks, check them out. They're great. Yeah.
Check out iFanboy.com, where you can check out the iFanboy podcast. Great conversation about comic books, as well as I pop in every month for the movies and TV talk. As you mentioned, I co-host All About Android over on the Twit network at twit.tv/AAA. Me and Jason Howell and Quinton Dow and Florence Ion, every week talk about Android and the Nothing phone and all that fun stuff. And then lastly, one thing we didn't touch on in our conversation is that my horrible affliction of turning my fandom into work, as done with comic books and technology. Most recently, I picked up the hobby about 10 years ago playing pinball. And then me and Jay Adelson from Dig and Revision 3 fame, co-founded a company called Scorebit. You can check it out at scorebit.io. We've got a mobile app as well as some hardware that basically connects pinball machines to the internet and does a whole bunch of cool stuff from there. So check out scorebit.io.
Fantastic. Folks, I haven't been mentioning it because we started recording these before I really was sure which one I was using, but our URL is awordpodcast.com. You can go pass that around if you're wanting to subscribe or give it to other folks. awordpodcast.com. Thanks you again. Thanks you. There's so much thanks I had to pluralize it. Thanks you again, Ron Richards. It was great talking to you, man.
My pleasure. Thanks, Tom.